Welcome back to NuWho Review. I am your host, Farrar, and I am here with an entirely different guest this time, my good friend Anna, who is stepping in while the other two normal cast members are out not feeling well. She has an interesting perspective on this episode because her grandfather worked for NASA.
And I never met him.
Well, but some of that knowledge has passed on to you because you have studied NASA. So at least indirectly, there's a little bit of that legacy there.
I have heard so many stories, basically.
So you, like many other people that I've read online, can completely pick apart the science of this episode.
More or less. Primarily from the NASA standpoint, though.
Like the fact that they would send a shuttle to the moon when that's probably impossible.
I mean, it's 2049. I don't understand why they needed people to go there anymore, especially if their entire plan was to just blow it up in the first place. I feel like they would have just bombed it and gotten over with.
I wondered about why they used the shuttle, because the shuttle program has been abandoned, but they haven't abandoned rockets.
Right.
And surely there would have been some rockets that they could have adapted if it was a one-way mission anyway.
Right.
Why send the unnecessary added bulk and all the wings and stuff that you don't need because it's meant for re-entry?
Right.
Why send the shuttle? And the only thing I could think of was, it's the most recognizable space vehicle, so the writers picked the shuttle.
I mean, there was the original pod that landed on the moon. Wouldn't people have recognized that, though?
Maybe, but in 2049, that's an antique. In 2049...
So is the regular shuttle.
Shuttle's going to be, let's see, maybe in the Whoniverse, they abandoned the shuttle flights in 2019, so it's only been 30 years.
Okay.
I mean, the shuttles themselves, they started building them in the late 70s.
It's true.
Started putting them into use in the 80s. Mm-hmm. And they were good enough to use at least until recently, so obviously something can be decades old and you can still use it.
In theory, they are still reusable. It just costs so much money to fix up that it's not worth it for them anymore.
What I was thinking was it would have been hilarious if what they actually sent up was the Russian copy of the American space shuttle. But Lundvik actually had NASA on her spacesuit.
Yeah.
That takes care of that theory.
This isn't the moon. Where are we?
A recycled space shuttle. 2049, judging by that prototype version of the Bennett oscillator.
One of the things that I thought was interesting about this episode is that if they hadn't been there, the outcome would have been exactly the same. If the Doctor and Clara and Courtney hadn't arrived, the single-celled spiders would have killed all three of the astronauts.
Oh, yeah.
They would not have been able to set off the nukes.
Yeah.
The space chicken would have hatched. They would have got a new moon, and everything would have...
Chicken. Sure, no, space chicken it is.
That's what I'm calling it.
That's what Courtney tried to call it. I know it's not a chicken.
People are calling it space dragon, but then that leads to soup dragon, and you just end up with all manner of things. I'm calling it space chicken.
All right. Yeah, in theory, the same thing would have happened unless NASA had a remote detonation.
Well, but obviously they didn't. Otherwise, they would have sent an unmanned vehicle.
And I still think they should have, in all realism, they would have sent an unmanned vehicle. Why waste a life? There was a couple of things that I noticed. One of them is that they hire scientists who, for some reason, their first thought is to kill whatever this is on the moon that's causing everybody trouble rather than study the shit out of it first.
Not a very scientist thing to do, yeah.
Yeah, but the other thing was sending men on what seemed to be an unmanned mission if you're just going to blow it up regardless.
I don't know. I think maybe the writer was thinking of Armageddon. You know, that really crappy Bruce Willis movie with the Aerosmith song? Where they had to send a team of people to put nukes on an asteroid. Except this time it was nukes on the moon.
Yeah, I guess, maybe. I don't know. Part of me was also upset that a team of scientists wouldn't first study this new species they found living on the moon and get all the possible information they could before destroying it.
I kind of wondered about that. You know, the Doctor found very easily that giant vat of amniotic fluid.
Yeah.
And I thought, you know, with all the satellites that we've got orbiting Earth and things that are studying the moon from a distance, we wouldn't have seen that?
I mean, there's still a rover that's going around the moon right now, and it wouldn't have, found a weird cave and some fluid in it. And nobody thought about what would happen if the moon wasn't there. I mean, they kind of tried to figure out what would happen if the moon wasn't there, but they're not even really.
We can't even get into the so-called science of this episode, though. I mean, they talked about an increase of several billion tons in mass of the moon. The Captain Lundvik said high tides everywhere all at once. That's not how the moon works. You would have
mean-
had really crazy tides
Yeah.
if the moon had more gravity,
Right.
more gravitational pull because it had somehow increased in mass, which is impossible. Mass doesn't come from nowhere. Okay, but anyway, if the moon
It's
really...
a growing being. We're going with added mass here. It
But-
started off significantly smaller in that egg.
Yeah, but so do eggs.
Yeah, it would have just collected the
When it-
fluid from around it.
When an
and-
egg turns
yeah.
into a chicken, the yolk turns into the...
Yeah, I
Yeah,
know.
anyway.
I'm trying to make it work for the viewers.
Oh, I think it worked because it's a fantasy show. It's a fantasy adventure show. It's not
Right.
science fiction.
Right.
The fact that the moon would have had more of a gravitational pull meant that the tides would have been crazy. But they land on a beach with a nice, gentle, rolling, lapping
Yeah.
ocean. Yeah, that was very strange to me.
Also, the thing ended up laying a new moon in seconds.
And
of being born.
It laid an egg that was bigger than itself.
Yeah, within seconds of being born. That apparently needs no fertilization because we've never seen another one of these beings.
The only thing that I can think of is the Tribbles from Star Trek, where
Yeah.
Dr. McCoy said they're born pregnant. They apparently have enough nutrition to just make that happen.
I guess.
Yeah.
Without ever eating anything? Maybe it ate the spiders.
Somebody came up with this bizarre theory which would have worked if they had actually put it in the episode.
Okay.
The space chicken was a multi-dimensional being, and what we saw was its protrusion into our dimension, and it's adding to its mass by feeding on energy from another dimension.
Okay.
Since energy can neither be created nor destroyed,
Yeah.
it has to come from somewhere.
Right.
And there somewhere was like a parallel universe. And presumably that's where it went off to as soon as it was done hatching.
Since we never saw it leave.
Kind of like sea turtles, how the only time they're on land is when they're laying their eggs and when they hatch, and then they go back out to sea for the rest of their lives.
So it's not a chicken anymore, it's a sea turtle.
Yeah, I guess it's space turtle
It's a
now.
space turtle.
Call Terry Pratchett. The great Atuin has been born.
There was a mining survey. Mexicans. Something happened up here, nobody knows what. That's when the trouble began back on Earth. High tide everywhere at once. The greatest natural disaster in history.
By the way, 3 British astronauts, all working for NASA.
Yeah, I found that a little strange myself.
That's an amazing coincidence.
I must say, I feel very strange.
Not much oxygen. So, nothing to worry about.
Suffocation is nothing to worry about.
We can survive for quite a time yet.
While you play with that yo-yo.
Just a simple gravity reading, Sarah.
This episode, in case anyone hadn't figured it out yet, was originally written for the 11th Doctor as played by Matt Smith. You could tell that there was a little bit of a blend because I can completely see Matt Smith testing the gravity by doing a monkey walk.
Yeah.
But Peter Capaldi asked for a yo-yo,
Yeah.
which Tom Baker had used in The Ark in Space, which was one of his better-known episodes. And Peter Capaldi grew up watching John Pertwee, the Third Doctor, and Tom Baker, the Fourth
He
Doctor.
is an old Who fan, absolutely.
So I think the yo-yo made sense. This episode is also the first episode of Doctor Who written by this particular writer. So I think maybe we need to cut him some slack. Because there have been some other writers for Doctor Who started out with really rough episodes.
Yeah.
And by their 3rd or 4th episode, they were getting really good.
Yeah.
I read online that while briefing Harness on how to put the script together, Stephen Moffat apparently told him, Hinchcliffe the out of it for the first half.
That explains Moffat.
It also kind of explains why they went for horror at the expense of science.
Yeah, it was very Apollo 18.
I have not seen Apollo 18.
Oh, well, don't watch it. You'll just be disappointed.
I have seen people talking about the fact that this seemed to have been influenced by Apollo 18, but also by... There's an old science fiction story from back in 1934 by an author called Jack Williamson called Born of the Sun. In that science fiction story, moons and planetoids and other things in the solar system that we thought were just other celestial bodies were actually eggs. So we're going way back
Okay.
with that idea. It was interesting to see that kind of done in a more modern
Yeah,
context.
that's fair.
The moon isn't breaking apart, the moon is hatching.
Huh?
The moon's an egg.
The Hinchcliffe reference that Stephen Moffat made was Philip Hinchcliffe, producer of Doctor Who from 1974 to 1977, during which time some of the scariest episodes of Doctor Who were produced.
Right.
So apparently, Stephen Moffat has decided what a lot of fans of the old series have decided, which is basically Doctor Who is horror for kids.
Well, yeah. I thought that was a given.
Which is why I kind of said, the science doesn't work, but it's more of a fantasy adventure show.
I mean, as a kids show, you don't really need to worry about it. The kids that they're aiming for don't even know that much about science yet to begin with. And on top of it, they don't care.
It's a family show. People call it a kids show, but it's really a family show. It does come on at 8:30 at night.
Yeah.
Which, according to BBC rules, 8 o'clock is the cutoff for children's viewing. But you're still in, like, family viewing time. I liked the look of this episode. I liked the feel of this episode.
Okay.
It was very cinematic, but it wasn't trying to do too much. And I think apart from some of the peripheral characters who were so peripheral that they were forgettable, I thought it was pretty well cast, too. I liked the fact that the Doctor didn't quite know exactly what was going on when they got where they were going.
Yeah.
There was still that little bit of mystery. The Doctor can act like he's totally in control all the time, but he's almost as clueless as you are.
I feel like they started getting there with Matt Smith. He would act on ideas that he thought would happen, but I don't think he ever actually had any idea.
Well, he was wrong a lot.
Yeah, exactly. But he would act on it as though he knew it was going to go on.
I think if this episode had been Matt Smith's Doctor, the ending would have been a little bit different. People have been making a really big deal about the fact that the Doctor went away and decided not to involve himself in a decision that should be made by humans for humans.
He had very good logic.
The theory is that Matt Smith would have done it, but before he did it, he would have given a big speech like, do what you're best at, be gloriously human.
Right.
Or something like that, and
Peter Capaldi doesn't really like humans.
No, he doesn't do that. It reminds me again of The Ark in Space, because in The Ark in Space, Tom Baker's Doctor had a relatively new passenger in the TARDIS, and he basically felt that he was an idiot.
You're a clumsy, ham-fisted idiot.
I said I was sorry, didn't I?
What? Come out. And don't touch anything.
I'm only trying to open the door.
A little trip to the moon, you said, just to prove to Harry.
Well, I didn't expect him to start messing about with the Helmick regulator. Come away from there, Harry.
But instead, they kind of turned it around, and Capaldi's Doctor is being rude to Clara.
Yeah.
And I'm actually okay with that, because since they've completely rewritten Clara's character, I think it's okay for them to rewrite the relationship between them as well.
Well, sure. I feel like Clara's character has changed primarily because of how she's dealing with the different Doctor.
Yeah, she was kind of in control of Matt Smith's Doctor. She doesn't have any control over Peter Capaldi's Doctor at all.
No. Matt Smith's Doctor was very much all whim and no real guideline. So somebody had to step in.
One thing that I do like about the episodes that I've seen of this season, though, is that they're not afraid to go small when it comes to the scope and scale of the story. It's more about the characters and where they're going, whereas it really seemed towards the end of Matt Smith's era, especially with the whole "the Doctor's been shot" arc, and we had to follow that for his last season, it seemed like every episode somebody was going, okay, what's going to be epic about this one?
Yeah.
That it had to just get bigger and bigger and bigger. And now it seems like we're dealing a little bit more with the characters.
There's only so many times you can just do bigger things.
Exactly.
Before it becomes so stressful that you don't want to write it anymore.
Well, and some friends and I were wondering at the end of the last season, we were like, well, where are they going to go from here? I mean, he's already saved the entire universe multiple times over. We've had the Time War. We've had Gallifrey. And, I mean, where do you go from here? And apparently you go
back to your basics. You go back to your characters.
The mystery of the Doctor himself.
Exactly.
Which I think it's a good idea.
Has it always been an egg?
What do we think of the different Courtneys? The Courtney before this episode and the Courtney that was actually in the TARDIS in this episode.
I mean, she went from troublemaker to somebody who actually thinks for herself is what I think happened. Which is okay, because really that's what the Doctor has always tried to do for people. Pushed them until they thought for themselves, and then they could take control of the situation for the better.
Right.
Basically.
I think it's interesting that she went from whispering Ozzy loves squatty in Clara's ear to insisting on calling her Miss.
Yes.
And I wonder if that's because she felt kind of privileged to be in the TARDIS and like trying to maybe put herself in the Doctor's good graces.
Part of that is I think that the line between teacher and actual person got crossed for her. So she gained a new respect for this person that apparently does, like, battles with life and death situations on a regular basis. And that requires some respect.
I'm not sure. Courtney could be at that age where she's just not quite sure which direction she's going to go. Does she want to straighten up and fly right? Does she want to keep being a disruptive influence? In the previous episode, they did say at the parent-teacher conference that she's going from very disruptive influence to just disruptive influence.
Part of that, though, is why has she become a disruptive influence? Because for a lot of kids, they become destructive because they're so bored with how things are normally going that they have to do something to make things interesting, which is normally not good for everybody else involved, but it's great for them. And in this case, the adventure is given to her.
I thought about the reason that she would be a disruptive influence, and the two different approaches that we have to that behavior between Clara and the Doctor. Mm-hmm. Now, I don't remember exactly when the Doctor told Courtney that she wasn't special.
I don't think he actually did.
That might have happened off screen.
I don't think he actually did. I think that she said that to try to get back on the TARDIS.
Well, what I was thinking was, we have the Doctor, who, by the way, is not only a parent but a grandparent, pretty experienced compared to Clara, who is not a parent but deals with students on a regular basis. Maybe in this episode, Clara represents the relatively inexperienced parent who thinks that naughty children are acting out because they have low self-esteem, which is often true, and that telling them they're important and special can inspire some feelings of self-worth. Whereas as an experienced parent, the Doctor knows you can't just tell them, you can't just give them words to tell them that they're special. You have to give them an opportunity to achieve something.
Yes.
And then they have something tangible that they can take justifiable pride in.
Exactly.
And that will give them a boost of self-esteem.
Exactly.
I think the Doctor knows that if your kid is smart enough, they're going to get that if you just tell them you're special, they're just going to feel like those are empty words and it's not going to mean anything.
Right.
And they were at odds over how to do it. Where do we think Courtney is going to go from here? What do we think of her now?
She probably thinks that she's on top of the world. She's done all these things that she can't even... I mean, she's tried to Instagram it or something while she was up there.
Yeah, she was trying to do Tumblr.
She was Facebooking Tumblr or something. I don't think anybody's going to believe those pictures, but she's going to try her best to convince people, and I think that people aren't going to believe her, so they're going to call her on her shit the whole time, and then she's going to get knocked down a few.
I wonder if they're setting her up for a fall, just like they're setting Clara up for a fall, and they might even be setting the Doctor up for a fall. It seems like all three of them could be going forward now with slightly different ideas of what's going on than is actually the case.
Oh, that was me allowing you to make a choice about your own future. That was me respecting you.
One of the things that I realized about this episode, though, was even though it was written for Matt Smith, it seems very Seventh Doctor to me.
Okay.
How much of the Seventh Doctor stuff have you seen?
None.
Okay. There was a Seventh Doctor story called The Curse of Fenric.
Okay.
I think it's one of the last episodes. The Seventh Doctor was written as a is he or isn't he good or bad type of character.
They always border that line, I think.
Yeah. Him very much so, because he frequently poked and prodded and manipulated his companion. And in The Curse of Fenric, he actually made it seem as if he betrayed her and joined the other side. And he explains to her, I had to do that. I had to make you believe that I had betrayed you. She listens to his reasoning, she understands him, and she forgives him. I think they're saving that moment for a later episode.
Well, sure.
I think Clara's going to come back. There's going to be a moment of reconciliation.
You have to have some sort of cliffhanger.
Yeah. They're going to part on better terms.
Right.
But they have conflicting ideals. one isn't right and one isn't wrong. They just have two different ways of looking at the same thing. And eventually, that just means they're going to part company.
Right.
Somehow. See, because I think there was an awful lot of stuff that they're going to end up apologizing for later. Like, I can understand Clara's anger. I can't understand her arrogance.
Okay.
I can understand the doctor's actions. I can't understand his coldness.
Okay.
Or when I say understand, I'm thinking more along the lines of sympathize or empathize.
Sure.
I can understand why he did what he did. I think he did it in a very alien way.
Yeah.
Which alienated somewhat Clara.
Yeah. But she's also fighting back a bit because it's completely different from what she's used to with him.
Right. This isn't Matt Smith where they're fighting over the laptop.
Yeah.
And we can only do this on Wednesdays.
Right.
But earlier we saw the doctor enticing her into an adventure.
Right.
You know, he lands his TARDIS and sticks his head out the door and says, "Fish people."
Yeah.
And that was enough. That was enough for her to go with him. And this seems to be...
I mean, that and they robbed a bank. And as she left, don't rob a bank. Don't rob a bank what? Without me.
Yeah, which kind of makes me wonder, how much did this episode change their relationship? I think they wanted to give us the impression that it changed it a lot more than it actually has.
That's possible, too.
I like the metaphor of coming out of your shell, though. Certainly the doctor has doubts about what he did because of the look on his face when he saw Clara's reaction. Clara has doubts because she is seeking reinforcement from Danny. She goes to him and says, "Wasn't he wrong to do that? Wasn't he? Wasn't he?"
Right.
She's seeking reinforcement.
Right.
A lot of people are talking about the very end, and there seems to be a split, Team Clara and Team Doctor. I don't really see that because I think they both had reasons for doing what they did, and they both had reasons to be angry. They were both right, and they were both wrong. But just for a second, when Clara was making that big fuss in the TARDIS, and she said, "I'm getting out," I thought, bye. I was kind of ready for her to go. There are people online who were basically saying the doctor had firm moral ground for doing what he did, but because of the way the scene was written, he looks like the bad guy for all the wrong reasons. I don't necessarily see that. I mean,
No.
if he had gone further, he would have been the bad guy if he had said, "All right, out."
Yeah.
And he returned her anger.
Yeah.
Instead, to me, he looked a little confused.
Yeah.
Because, and this seemed a little backwards to me, Clara has gone from the woman who was willing to sacrifice herself in order to save the doctor because he'd saved so many other people. And now is constantly berating him, saying, "Don't treat me like any other ordinary normal human." I don't think he does. I mean, after all, just before she complained to him about that and said, "Don't lump me in with the rest of the ordinary, predictable, whatever," he gave her the opportunity to do what he does every week. She made the choice.
Right.
Personally, I don't think he really disappeared. I think he just hid the TARDIS. And he waited until that last second when the decision had been made, and then he reappeared. I don't think he actually went anywhere because it was too important. I mean, if the decision had been made in the other direction, he would have jumped in and saved his favorite species.
Right. Or maybe.
But
it's no longer his favorite species, I don't think.
Well, at the end of the episode, he kind of makes a speech that the doctor made in the Ark in Space. He goes to the Ark in Space and he sees human beings who were in hibernation, select few who had been chosen to leave the planet in quarantine as the rest of the planet's humans were all dying. He stands in this room surrounded by sarcophagi, and he gives this speech.
Homo sapiens. What an inventive, invincible species. It's only a few million years since they crawled up out of the mud and learned to walk. Puny, defenseless bipeds. They've survived flood, famine, and plague. They've survived cosmic wars and holocausts. Now, here they are, out among the stars, waiting to begin a new life. ready to outsit eternity. They're indomitable. Indomitable.
And he speaks with admiration of how
Right.
human beings, despite their limited knowledge, they're ready to go and conquer the universe. And he kind of made that speech at the end of this episode. He made a version of it.
Right.
About how human beings went throughout the universe and they last as long as the universe does.
Right.
The look on his face was kind of hard for me to read, but
It's his eyebrows.
It seemed very optimistic to me.
In the mid-21st century, humankind starts creeping off into the stars. It spreads its way through the galaxy to the very edges of the universe. And it endures until the end of time.
Doctor Who's writers now are to the point where they really like teasing us. Every trailer looks like this next episode is going to be the one where everything changes, and it doesn't really happen. And even the titles now are deceptive.
Yeah, a little bit.
Robot of Sherwood, he was not a robot.
He wasn't.
Time Heist, not really a heist. Kill the Moon, no killing.
Yeah. But all the intent was to kill the moon.
It was Lundvik's intent.
Right.
It was also the intent of all the people on Earth who turned off
the lights.
their lights.
Yeah.
Although, honestly, I saw like entire cities going dark, so I'm thinking probably it was just the government of every country that controlled the power grids.
You have to wonder how many people were just staring at their TV going, what the f*** is going on with the moon right now? It's
Well-
not like the first landing of the moon where like everybody's just intently waiting. I don't think.
Well, not only that, but the Amish didn't even get a vote.
Yeah.
And the people for whom it was daytime didn't get a vote.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was a little bit. From the moon, you can't see lights on Earth
You can't. This is true.
because there's always the sun that is making the part of the atmosphere that it shines on so bright by comparison that any man-made lights are so dim that your eyes can't make out the difference.
Oh, exactly.
And Clara's looking at the Earth through ordinary binoculars, it looks like.
Yeah.
And so she
I
wouldn't
was
have been able
curious
to see
about
that.
too. One, why do they have ordinary binoculars? And two, how do they see the Earth so well? I mean, you have ordinary binoculars. We had them as toys growing up. I don't know about you, but you might be able to see into your neighbor's yard, and that's really about it.
Yeah. Well, if they had super binoculars in 2049, why don't they have, like, super United Nations emergency session, let's have a vote in the next 45 minutes?
I guess.
Because didn't she say that they had 45 minutes to make a decision, and they were going to cast their votes by turning off the lights?
Yeah.
If they have this wonderful communications network around the world in the year 2049, why not just say, hey, every head of state of every country on Earth, cast your vote?
Text yes or no to 55555.
Right. Of course, it didn't matter anyway, because they completely ignored the will of the people or whoever turned off the lights.
Which I think was ultimately the point.
Yeah.
The doctor wanted Clara to make the decision.
Right. And he knew that she'd make the right one, even when everybody else was against her.
Right.
The captain, the people down below turning off their lights. Well, thank you very much for jumping in at the last minute and helping out.
Thanks for having me here.
And we'll see you next time.
Does it mean somewhere else there's a space dragon in some other dimension sucking energy away from this to make it balance out?
Maybe that's where dark matter comes from.
Oh.
Maybe it's space dragon poop.
This sounds like Futurama now.